through your lens, what happened at, at the GCOM Center? Because as you know, Mr. Peters, we have heard all narratives from all sides of this divide.
Well, there was a number of things that happened at the GCOM Center, and I mean, look, a lot of money was invested in these elections. Guyana budgeted billions of dollars in this election. We had three different former chief electoral officers from three different countries that came to Guyana to provide technical advice. We had the former chief electoral officer of Ghana, the former chief electoral officer of India, and the former chief electoral officer of Canada, Jean-Pierre Kingsley, who was one of the longest serving chief electoral officers here and highly respected. So it's not for the sake that GCOM did not have a significant and tremendous amount of resources that was put into this machinery to ensure that the elections were free, were fair, and was free from any fear. Right? So we had all that infrastructure in place. In addition, the ballots were printed in Canada and produced here to ensure the integrity of it.
Correct.
Right? So a lot was at stake in this election, and a lot went into it to make sure that the will of the people prevailed. I arrived in Guyana on the short-term observer schedule. So I'll see if it comes up here.
Yes.
So I arrived in Guyana on the 26th of February, and I left on the afternoon of the 5th of March, which was really the schedule that was set up for short-term observers. And so when I arrived on the 25th, I was, we had briefings with GCOM. Also, the different observer groups met together. So AmCham, the Guyana Bar Association, the business sector, private sector commission, etc. We all met so that resources can be pooled and people know where others were placed, so that people weren't congregating in one area and some areas were underserved. I attended political rallies, 2 rallies for the APNU AFC, 1 rally for the PPP in Loziknan. Their final rally in Loziknan I attended, plus I attended the PNC APNU AFC in Durban Park. All those rallies went well. There were no violence. I didn't see any political tensions between the parties. People were jubilant for all the sides, and the political leaders were respectful, as far as I saw.
Right.
Election day, there was a few incidents. There was one incident on West Demawara. There was an incident at Monrepo where people made the allegation of fake ID cards being distributed and all that sort of stuff. But that didn't turn out to anything. That was just political propagandizing. But everyone rushed down there. There was Amna Ali and Basil and all those people rushed down there. But that didn't turn out to be anything. I worked in Region 5, which is Mahaica Berbice, on election day. So I went down to Berbice and I observed the elections there. And the returning officer was professional. We had a lot of APNU, AFC, well, mostly PNC people who congregated outside of the regional office, but everything was peaceful. And we had no really untoward incidents. There was the tabulation that took place, and the tabulation was observed by the Carter Center, European Union, the Bar Association, the Private Sector Commission, and others, and everything was above board.
Right.
And when the recount was conducted, the numbers squared with what took place at the count or tabulation on elections day. I remained in Region 5 on the 3rd of March, and the count was completed in Region 5. I returned back to Region 4, Georgetown, and I started working at the GCOM Command Center on March 4th of 2020.
Right.
A lot of things took place that day. The first set of circumstances was, I mean, we got there very early in the morning. Most of the foreigners stayed at the Marriott, so there was a huge convoy from the Marriott to the GCOM Command Center, where all the chief electoral officer from Canada, the Carter Center people, myself from the Bar Association, we all traveled in a convoy over there, got there for about 8 o'clock in the morning, because the count was supposed to start, the tabulation was supposed to start early that morning. So we all got there at 8 o'clock for the count to start anywhere between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Nothing happened. We got there and we're just sitting around, standing around socializing, because GCOM isn't doing anything.
Right.
Close to 11 o'clock in the morning, we got word that Mr. Mingo apparently was ill. He was on the 3rd floor of the building in one of the offices.
Right.
Shortly after that, an ambulance came and wheeled him out with a mask on, an oxygen mask.
Right. Right.
We also heard that his deputy called in sick that day. And so people at that point was concerned about who is going to step up.
Correct.
You know, because here we are, and we want this process to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's done in most of the regions, because the numbers were coming in from most of the regions, and there were very few places left, and Region 4 was one of them. 1 o'clock, they restarted. There was issues with the spreadsheet that was used. People objected. The count stopped again. Between the count stopping and restarting shortly after 5, you know, the political leaders from the parties came. So there was at least 2 former presidents in the room. Barrett Jagdeo was there, and Donald Ramatar were there.
Yes.
And there were other high echelon people of the PPP there. Mr. Ali, who is a presidential candidate, was there as well.
Right.
You know, the PNC had their high level people as well. So Valda Lawrence was there, Basil Williams was there, James Bond was there, and other political operatives were there. Outside of GCOM now, there was a whole bunch of APNU AFC supporters that mobbed out there. Mm-hmm. The media was there as well. But what was distasteful with respect to the media is GCOM set up, and I would imagine it was an expensive media center for the media. And yet on that day, they banned the media from entering the premises. So the media had to stand outside. So the media was not privy to most of what was happening inside, except if someone told them what was happening inside. So this is all on the 4th. So around let's say 6 o'clock in the evening, the GCOM chairman had to intervene, because one of the females, well, 2 of them, said they weren't feeling well. And she came into the room and she pleaded for compassion. And there's nothing anyone could have done at that point. The count stopped. The count had started back briefly. It stopped at 6 o'clock. They told us they were going to start back around 10, 11 p.m. because they were going to find 2 substitute returning officers, or 2 DROs to substitute So we're all there at 11 o'clock. There were two DROs at GCOM Command Center sitting in a room.
Right.
Mr. Lowenfield shows up, and there are videos of all these things because I made videos and other people made videos because, objective evidence is important in these cases, especially where you have propaganda and misinformation prevailing. You want to have the direct evidence in the form of what you see and what you hear. So I made a lot of videos.
Correct.
Mr. Lowenfield shows up. When Mr. Lowenfield shows up, we don't know what discussion he had with the people in the two deputy returning officers in the room. But one of them sneaks through the back that led to the garage where the GCOM vehicles were parked and left. So now we don't have two deputy returning officers to continue the process. Mm-hmm. But what the PPP had done is they had called other DROs to come to the scene as well. So other DROs were there as well. And so when Lowenfield said, well, we don't have two DROs, there became the debate with Mr. Ali and Mr. Nandlal and Mr. Lowenfield and Mr. Mustafa. And all the observers were there. And what was interesting is if you look at the videos, you'll see about 30 or 40 cameras recording. All the foreign and local observers took their cameras out and they were recording everything that was said and everything that took place during the encounter with Mr. Ali and Mr. Lowenfield. And Mr. Lowenfield basically claimed that he could not trust the DROs that were there that the PPP had beside them. And these were his employees. Mm-hmm. These were his employees. Anyway, there was some negotiations that took place. Mm-hmm. And so he used one of the DROs that was there. So the recount started shortly after 1 a.m. in the morning on March 5th. When the recount restarted, the same shenanigans took place, where there was a complaint that people were tired. So one of the persons left, came back and took the computer and the flash drive, and there was some suspicions raised. Mm-hmm. So people went over to the room where the person entered, and much to their surprise, they found the two females that complained that they were tired at 6 p.m. and had to leave because they couldn't function anymore. They were still there at the command center.
Wow.
And this man was there that took the flash drive and the laptop that claimed that he couldn't function anymore. He was in the room with others working on the computer with the flash drive. Hmm. And so the Guyana police force was called in. And so the assistant commissioner who was in charge of Region 4 came, and other officers came. Mm. And Lowenfield came back to the scene, and no one was arrested, but they were taken away. So the count effectively stopped.
Right.
Effectively stopped. Nothing of substance took place after the flash drive situation took place.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So we all got there. I went back to my hotel, which was in Marriott, got some rest. And I got there around 9 o'clock in the morning. When I got there, the room was packed. A lot of observers were there. I don't know if some of them slept over. Yeah. But a lot of observers were there. The diplomats from all the embassies were there. Correct. Well, not all the embassies, but the major centers, or the major countries that were in Guyana: Canada, the United States, Great Britain, and the European Union. Their envoys were there, and all the political people were there. So you had the PPP people, led by
Right.
Mr. Ali. He was there along with his people. Lennox Schulman was there with his people.
Mm-hmm.
The PNC, or APNU AFC. I say PNC because very few AFC persons were there. I didn't recognize the AFC leadership.
Right.
Most of the people that were there was the PNC leadership, Father Lawrence, Basil Williams, James Bond, and those people. Very few of the AFC people showed up. So some of them were there. The foreign minister showed up and said that she wanted to meet with the foreign observers and the diplomats, and actually led the way to a room in the GCOM Command Center. Obviously, somebody had to advise her of this room and that it was set up for her use, because the door was open, the lights were on, and the seats were assembled to hold all of the diplomats and the observers. So we were all there.
Wow.
And so she started speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Dr. Cummins is trained in the art of diplomacy. And so Dr. Cummins didn't come out directly and say, look, my bosses are annoyed with the posture that they observe the foreign observers taken. And so the next step is to revoke the credentials. She didn't come out that way and said it. She said somebody whispered in her ears
Mm-hmm.
about revoking the credentials of the foreign observers. But she's not going to go there. Well, if you're not going to go there, why even speak about it?
I mention it.
Right. Why mention it? She mentioned it for specific reasons.
Right.
Because she thought she was going to intimidate the observers that were present. And there was a lawyer in the room. Tenny Husty attempted to save her from herself. And he said, at this point, you may want to exit this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't take the cue. She carried on. And so it brought on the ire of the British High Commissioner, who asked her whether it's even appropriate to have the meeting in that room and at that venue. Right? So he challenged her. Then the Canadian High Commissioner chimed in. I chimed in to ask her why she would make such a comment that on its face appeared intimidatory. The former Bajan Prime Minister, he was incensed at that point, so he took his observer badge off and actually was handing it back to her because he felt that bringing us up to that room and making that comment was the height of insult. But not only did that happen, but Roxanne Myers showed up. And the problem with Roxanne Myers is Roxanne Myers exhibit no diplomacy. Roxanne Myers showed up, handed the foreign minister a cell phone in the middle of her dialogue with the Bajan former prime minister, and then got her out of the room.
Wow.
And then told all of the assembled diplomats and foreign observers that they're in the wrong room. They have no place being in this room.
Wow.
So it's like you invite somebody to your house and then you kick them out. So it really set a bad and ominous tone for that day. The local politicians and the observers, most of them suspected something was happening, so they all rushed up and they were standing outside the door watching what was happening inside. We left after the Bajan Prime Minister expressed his disgust, went downstairs. Shortly after we got downstairs, we were told that there's a bomb threat that was made to the building, and everyone has to evacuate. So the assistant commissioner of police, who was in charge of Region 4, he communicated that message to the observers and the foreign diplomats assembled. And people decided, since there were the ballots inside that building, this is a ruse, this is a hoax to get people out of the building. And so a lot of people decided they were not leaving. And a lot of people stood their ground in there, even though, you know, the police had their operation, the bomb dogs and so on came and were checking out the premises. We had the media as well. They didn't know what was going on.
Right.
I think I was the first one that sort of put the video out there, because I realized the importance of what happened with the foreign ministers. So I rushed back to my hotel and uploaded it to my Facebook, my Facebook page, and sent it to the media colleagues whose numbers I had in WhatsApp, send them the clips. So that clip went around, and then later on, they were full of clips of the entire meeting with the foreign minister. But I stayed outside during the bomb threat operation, and I left the center around let's say 11:30, because I had to get back to the airport for 2:30 in the afternoon. I was leaving.